Hey, this is Todd. If you've ever read through the original DMG, the Dungeon Master's Guide from first edition, there was an appendix in the back of the book called Appendix N, which had a list of books and stories that were suggested reading. And I think those books and those stories that were listed there were ones that were inspirational to Gygax and company. And I think they made that collection so that it was something that if you were interested in, if you're wondering maybe where things came from or just wanted to know what was inspirational to them, you could go back and read it and perhaps find inspiration for your own games, not just maybe understanding where certain creatures or certain things might have come from, stuff like alignments or the magic using system, the way spells worked, or individual monsters, but just interesting ideas for games. Because if anything, D&D from the very beginning was a massive hodgepodge of stuff taken from all kinds of different sources in literature. And here you could see a list of maybe if you're wondering, well, where did white apes come from? Or why law and chaos, where do those concepts come from? You can see them in the different stories and books listed in Appendix N. Appendix N is one of those resources that is evergreen. You can always come back to it and always find new things to read, new things to look at, to discover what was inside the heads of the D&D creators. And even if you don't get inside their heads, you can at least see the sorts of things that inspired them and maybe get inspiration from them. Along the lines of inspiration, I wanted to go back and make a series of videos in which I could talk about movies that I found inspirational in sort of the game playing and world building and everything else that I do, and that maybe you've seen, maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't heard of, that you might find inspirational for your games, or at least find interesting enough to give a viewing to on a cold and rainy November night, or any time that you're home and you happen to be, or anywhere else, and you see, oh look, there's this video I see on online or on TV or in there's no video stores anymore, right? On Netflix or wherever. Maybe that's one that I heard about. Maybe I can talk about it. Well, the one I'm going to start off with is one that is fairly well known, at least in fantasy circles, and it's on the Disney Plus service, which just came out in the past week as I'm recording this. In other news, The Mandalorian is really good so far through a couple of episodes, but maybe that'll be a video for another day. This one is the Ron Howard project from the late 80s, I believe 1988, and that is Willow, which I guess is owned by Disney, but it's on the Disney network. I think maybe it is a Disney film. In any case, Willow is the story of they call them Elwyn. They're sort of off-brand hobbits. They're halflings, right? To use the D&D-ism, these are definitely creatures who would best be described as halflings. And a particular halfling, or actually the kids of this particular halfling, stumble upon a human baby, and that baby happens to be special. It's at the center of a prophecy that promises regime change to a human realm, and they have a different name. I believe the humans are called Daikini, and this particular realm is ruled by an evil sorcerer queen, and this evil sorcerer queen is not at all interested in a change of government. Sounds generic, right? Maybe a little bit hokey. Well, it is. And I think this has to do with the time when it was done. You have to remember, this is way before things like the Lord of the Rings movies came out, and way before, obviously, stuff like the Game of Thrones phenomenon has come and gone. There just wasn't a lot of fantasy films. And yes, I know you can go and you can look at different things in the 80s, and you can see a lot of fantasy and sci-fi films. You may look at IMDb and you'll see that the 80s had a fair number of fantasy films, some of them quite good, but they were usually in the B movie realm. Things like Beastmaster or Krull. I love Krull. I love Beastmaster, but these were not sorts of high budget, mainstream studio releases that were really going to get attention. Those are the kind of things that you caught on TV Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon, that sort of thing. So along comes Willow, and it's got Ron Howard, who at the time wasn't really, I think was really more on the rise, or at least seen as a really big director. It's funny, you think of him now with Solo, and the big ding against him seems to be that he's just kind of coming in to do a yeoman sort of workman-like job, and he's very safe and conventional and this, that, and the other. And I guess that's true of him now. I don't know what people thought of him then. I was in my teens at the time. Maybe young teens, I guess. So I didn't have a concept of how Ron Howard was seen, whether he was seen still as sort of an auteur, or if he was ever seen as an auteur or whatnot. But he was someone who was, a big-time director, coming at this with a big time studio, and it's a real fantasy film. So these were all really positive things. What does Willow have going for it? It's got a very game Warwick Davis, right? You've seen him in many things, but he gets to be the star. I mean, he is the Willow of the title Willow. He's not wearing any kind of rubber suit or fur. He shows up in a lot of the prequels and a lot of things where there is a diminutive character. Oftentimes, I think young Greedo in episode 1, I believe, is Willow. He shows up in a lot of different things, but in almost all of everything you've probably seen him in, you don't even know it's him because he's under layers of makeup. This is just him, being an Elwyn father of 2. He's a little bit hard put in his village, but he's got a family, and he is saddled with this child who his kids discover very Moses-like on the side of being sent down the river and delivered unto him. We get a young and svelte Val Kilmer, who plays the scene-stealing merc, Mad Mardigan. Everybody loves Mad Mardigan. I don't know anyone who doesn't like him. He was a very likable character. He's a lot of fun, adds a lot of levity to everything that he's in, and he has a nice character arc in the movie. You have Kevin Pollak. I don't know if he's what he's known for now. I know he's got very long at this point, running podcast that might still be on. I think he might be best well known at this point for The Usual Suspects. He is one of the suspects in that. He was also, or maybe still is also, a stand-up comedian. Did a really good William Shatner impersonation back in the day. And I'm sure if you look up his IMDb, he's been in a lot of stuff. But this one, it's hard to recognize him. If you may pick up on sort of his comedy, but he's one of these brownies, which in the film, it kind of takes the 19th century conception of fae. So he has brownies, these little tiny fae creatures. A lot of fun. You have a scenery chewing villainous witch, which is good. Again, it's not that original, but it's fun. Anyone who came of age in that era, particularly if they were a fan of fantasy and they were into that stuff. The movie Willow. I think everyone has fond feelings for it. Who doesn't enjoy Willow? If you want to talk about Ron Howard as sort of a workman-like, just sort of flat, by the numbers kind of director, if that's how you want to ding him. In this case, it works fine because it is a very unoffensive movie. There's nothing really bad about it. Characters don't do a bunch of dumb things. Everything seems to have fairly decent logic for why it's happening. I mean, there's not a lot. It's not like there's a lot of mechanics going on anyway. It's a fairly simple story. Our hero gets a hold of something. They've got to try to take it somewhere else and, of course, stop this very powerful being who's much more powerful than them, but they're the special person to stop it. In that sense, it's really not unlike the Lord of the Rings, so it's not trying to be that super epic, prophecies and everything notwithstanding. What do I like about it? What do I think that, as someone who might be coming to this movie, has never seen it, maybe never heard of it? I don't know how famous Willow is these days. Maybe there's a lot of people out there. If you're a younger person and you're new to the gaming, you're new to kind of fantasy media, you might have passed over, since now I feel like we're living in this time and we're in a cornucopia of fantasy and medieval media. You might not have to go to the well. Whereas in like the early '90s, late '80s when this came out, you could run through a lot of your choices of fantasy stuff. You'd seen them all. You could sit there and rattle off with a couple of friends, and when and everyone had seen everything that come out. So by the time Willow comes out, you're just hungry. You're hungry for anything. Now, I don't know how that translated to their box office. I did not look it up because I'm not sure. I think the audience was maybe more niche in those days than it is now. It seems like everybody loves this kind of stuff now, but maybe back then, not so much. I don't know. But what do I like about it? And I may hit some spoilers here, so if you haven't seen it, pause this, check it out, and then maybe come back to it. But what I love is, Mad Mardigan, great character. He's got a great arc, going from the mercenary who cares about nobody but himself to the selfless hero type. It's not unlike Han Solo in Star Wars. They're not the same. Mad Mardigan really plays up the humor stuff. Solo, at least in Star Wars, they don't play up the humor. I mean, he gets to be more comical, I guess, in Return of the Jedi. So maybe Mad Mardigan's closer to like Return of the Jedi, Han Solo, but they definitely play up the comedy aspects. But he goes from somebody who is accused rightfully of just being a very selfish person to being a hero, but he's just very funny, and everything he's in my face always lights up when the Mad Mardigan stuff comes on. It's like, ah, here he is. It's great, and I think it needed that levity because the movie, I don't want to say it's plotting, but it takes itself very seriously, and so having him there and also the brownies to really add a lot of comedy and lightness back into it was a positive. One of the things that Willow gets is hold of is this magic wand. It was supposed to be a very powerful magic wand. It doesn't have a real flavor. A lot of the magic in Willow's it revolves around transformation, so people get turned into different things. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens at a few key moments, particularly towards the end. And this magic wand was a famous sorcerer's or sorceress's magic wand. Willow never doesn't really get the hang of using it, and it's interesting how they play with this weak character. So if Willow was and he wants to be a magic user, Willow himself has ambitions, and I think unlike in some other heroes, he's not like a hobbit in the sense that he's living the good life in this secluded shire, and then he has to go on this road. Willow, he's a working man. He's working the fields. He's got people who sort of bully him. He wants to be a wizard. There's a wizard in his village, and he fails the test to become the wizard's apprentice. So he's somebody that really is looking, he's sort of stuck in where he is in his life, and he's looking for something else. He's looking to make that change, and then the adventure finds him, and that enables him, of course, as movies tend to do, to overcome these obstacles and get him into a new part of his life. But he finds this wand, or he's given the wand. I don't remember exactly which one, but he's either found or given this wand. And throughout the film, at various times, he's trying to use it with various levels of success. And it's an interesting way from a D&D kind of gaming RPG aspect to look at this, because it's almost like he's given this powerful artifact. But it's not just like, oh, we have a powerful artifact and now you can just do whatever you want. It seems to be limited, and not unlike the ring in Lord of the Rings. They always say, well, what can you do with the one ring? All it does is turn Bilbo invisible, but the answer is that what you can do with it is tied to your power level. It seems like there's a similar mechanic with the wand. If you were looking at it and you could say, what would be the gaming stuff, the meta gaming stuff, you were playing this out in D&D, and the result is what you see in the movie, you can see there are times where Willow's rolling against maybe his wisdom or maybe his constitution to control this wand, and he'll fail or he'll have mixed success, and mixed things will happen. So I thought that was interesting. It's definitely a different way to look at the wand. It's not totally useless. It doesn't try to kill him, but it's not a win button for him. He has to earn and gain enough experience, gain enough levels in Wizard to use it even a little bit, and he never really does get the hang of it. So it's an interesting item from that standpoint. The brownies are fun. They're very comical in the game, but they do give that flavor there. I said the 19th century kind of fairies because they're small. I don't know if they have wings, but I think they do. The brownies don't have wings, but they're just very small. They seem to indicate that there's hints that they could talk to woodland creatures. I think at one point they're flying on an owl. When you first run across them, they're mischievous. There's a lot of fun. The special effects of the movie, by the way, are good enough that this stuff, you can obviously see the seams. You can see where they're using optical effects or things to make things happen, but they're well done. I think they have actually aged pretty well, and that's something that helps because it had a big budget. They could do stuff like have the brownies and have other creatures that we do and make them look not terrible in a way that some of the other B movies had trouble with. And the movie has trolls in them, but they're not the trolls of Tolkien. They're not the trolls that you may have seen in your monster manual of whatever edition. They look like Chaka from Land of the Lost, and I know that reference dates me terribly. It's short, humanoid-sized, hairy, like ape men, basically. And I don't know the mechanics behind this, but you could, if you were going to gamify this, you're going to take it and say, oh, I like this concept of trolls I'm about to lay out for you. You could probably think about how to work this in your game. So they're in this ruined castle, citadel. I guess they're just trolls living there. That's where they live. Willow's got that wand, which again he can't control really well, but he's using to try to do things. He's able to zap one of the trolls. The troll collapses, essentially seems to kill it, and it kind of becomes like an egg sort of thing. And then these two heads pop out of the egg, a little bit like baby alien heads, and they're like that. But they're on a rope bridge over not a moat, but like a fetid pool of water. It is what it is. So of course Willow kicks the thing into the water. Now I don't know, and they never explain whether they would have stayed small, and that the water does something. How we don't know the relationship between all these steps, but it goes into the water, disappears. The water starts bubbling and cascading, and boom, 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 was going up, and then this massive two-headed creature comes out, starts just going to town and everything. I think it has some kind of breath weapon, and it's got double heads, and it's going, and it's kind of crazy. And that whole thing, that's a troll, right? So it's pretty wild. And they call it trolls. I don't know why they don't call it something else, because they don't call them halflings. They call them Elwyn, and humans are Daikini, but trolls are trolls. But these are not your father's trolls. These are not the trolls of my youth. However, they're neat, and you could think about how you might mechanize that in the game. Is it that you hit them with magic, and that causes that transformation? Does water have something to do with it? Like, you can't tell. The movie doesn't explain it all. No one says, "No, Willow, don't kick it in the water," right? Nobody does that, so we don't know whether it would have blown up on that bridge, and it just was convenient for the water, and I'm sure convenient for like maybe special effects and just getting a feel of it, or whether the water actually does something. It would be kind of weird if it only transformed if you killed it and knocked it into water. Is how often would that happen? And if I'm a troll, then I'm just living with water around me all the time, so that I can have that happen. And the trolls have no love for their own, because at one point another hairy creature is running around. Hairy, the Mogwai troll to the gremlin troll, and the giant gremlin troll basically eats it and rips it in half. And they don't show where the body goes, but it doesn't seem to turn into anything. So maybe it's just magic that does it. It's got like an anti-magic effect. In any case, it's kind of cool. It's definitely different. And it's one of the action set pieces in the movie. Certainly from a fantastical creature standpoint, that is the biggest and really maybe the only really fantasy creature. They kind of have these sort of pig dog things that are like, they're just dogs with costumes on that they have, but they look a little bit just grosser and meaner than your average dog. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of fantastic creatures. The brownies are, they're fantastic, but they're just miniature people. This is the only one that's really kind of strange, but it's there. It's neat. Those are definitely things I think if you were watching the film, pay attention to that stuff. See how you can use them. I think the brownies are fun because they're just kind of fun creatures, and you can think about different ways to use them. I think the D&D equivalent would probably be some sort of pixie, but they don't have some of the abilities that pixies have. But you could just see how they're used and how you might maybe give you some ideas how to use them. Mad Mardigan's great as a template for sort of a brash, selfish, but funny and in a way endearing mercenary or fighter NPC. The trolls, I can see, using them in different ways. Maybe don't call them trolls, but there's something else. But it's great because, if you have a lot of magic users in their party, you magic missile one of those, or you hit them with something like that, and suddenly it goes from a easy encounter, because these hairy creatures are not particularly tough, to a really tough encounter when some massive two-headed creature pops out of the corpse. So it could be a nice twist for some kind of event battle. And then if they're recurring in your campaign, then it becomes, well, how do you deal with them? You don't want to have magic users deal with them. Certainly if there's 3 or 4 of them, you don't want to fireball them and create big beasts. So it gives you something, well, now we have to just hack them or avoid them or do something else. And there's no sense in the movie if they're particularly intelligent or not, but they could be. There's an interesting note I want to go into about Willow before I call this quits. Unlike in the sort of pre-scoured Shire the Tolkien, like I mentioned before, Willow's home life, it's not idyllic. He is a hero with a problem. So unlike, say, Frodo, whose problems don't really start until the ring shows up and it's just people are coming after, so you can't stay here. Willow has issues already. Like I mentioned, there's definitely a kind of a bullyish, I don't know if he's the mayor or whatever, but he's a bully. He has a bully to contend with. He is not, he doesn't seem particularly well-to-do. He's working the fields. He wants to become a magician. He has this drive that is stymied. So he's someone in need of this adventure, though he may not know it yet. But all that said, when the adventure comes, he resists. They go through several steps. Well, we'll just take the baby here, and then we'll be done. Okay, we'll take the baby and we'll give it to this person, then we're done. And really, they have to keep roping him into it. And I say that because it gets into that concept of, in the movie, you might look at it, well, this is his fate. This is his destiny to do these things. He is the special person. And so, of course, like Luke or like any of these kind of heroes, if you avoid the adventure is just going to come for you until you get it. In game terms, a lot of people look at that and say, oh, if you were playing the game, you might think, oh, the DM is railroading me. I can't get out of this adventure. There's a fine line there, right? Because you want to think in a game that if you really didn't want to take on the Willow adventure, you could just drop it and leave, versus the GM's constantly putting the adventure in front of you until you just just give up and take it. But the other thing is what the movie does, and that maybe is my takeaway from this, is it isn't about it forcing it on Willow. What makes Willow end up taking on the quest is it plays upon Willow's character. This is a baby. This is something that's obviously it needs attention, and he is, as is shown in the movie, he is a father. He is someone who understands and who clearly loves his family. And it's just impossible for him, someone who is a truly good person, to see this creature, that's this helpless creature, and just leave it to its own fate, leave it to chance, and not help it. And that's what really drives the adventure. He tries to do these things, but each time he's not able to accomplish them. I don't look at it like he's being railroaded in the next step. The next step is obvious because his character demands that. In a way, it's like if you're playing the game and you were the lawful good paladin of yore, and something happens that clearly you wouldn't stand for, and you kind of want to turn away, and the GM goes like, you sure as a paladin of yore you're going to let that stand? And you go, you know what? You're right, GM. I can't let that stand. I have to go help it. Now, maybe that's railroading. Maybe that is fate. It is kind of a fine line as to how you judge what is a good character driving moment and what is a railroad job. But I would say this one, if there's a lesson to take over it about getting your party to the adventure, it's appealing to their character traits, appealing to these elements in their backstory, not necessarily individuals, but you look at it and say, oh, these guys are all have brothers and sisters, so let's appeal to their brother and sisterhood help, and maybe that will get them engaged in the story, engaged at taking on this adventure that just forcibly, physically pushing the adventure in front of them won't do. So it's interesting. So just to wrap up, that is Willow, which will be the first of, I hope, many movies, and not just movies, but TV shows and other fiction that I will go over, or at least cover, tell you why I like it, tell you what I think you can get from it, why maybe you should give it a watch, put it in, it's part of my own personal Appendix N. Maybe you can make it part of your own personal Appendix N. Until the next time, I will talk to you later.